So, never really made any films about this stuff before because I always felt like it was a bit too niche and people might not really be interested. But one of the things about the way that we fit here and the way that I fit, and the sort of journey that I've been on with fitting over the last, God knows how many years, 20 years, I've actually gone in a completely different direction to the way most fittings are done. So, just to keep it really short and sweet, I don't believe in doing trial and error fitting on launch monitors. So the majority of fittings, people think, oh, it's the best fitting in the world if you go in and the person that you're going to see has got the most number of shafts on the wall. And what happens is you hit loads of shots with all different clubs and all different combos, and you end up being sold. And the reason I say sold is it really is just a selling process. What goes best for you on that day. There's a few issues with that. The top three are, one is, there's very few people, say if you went for a driver fitting, that are capable of standing there and hitting 150 drivers without being completely, without dying on the mat, as my friend puts it. And so that's an issue, the sort of the phases that you go through with your ball striking in a fitting like that. Another issue is that if you are fitted that way, ultimately you never really get into the nitty-gritty of the club, unfortunately. Even though you've hit loads of shots with loads of different clubs, you haven't really taken into account the weight, because if you're just changing shafts, you're just screwing them in, taking them out, hitting another one. Each of those shafts needs to be a certain weight in that club, and then also you need to get into the perfect weight for you, and you also need to get into lie angle much earlier in the fitting than most people are doing, from my experience. So one thing that I always refer to is this thing, club interaction. So what are the things that you do to make that club work? And what's amazing about that is it doesn't matter what standard of player you are, you will adjust to that club. Otherwise you'll just hit terrible shot after terrible shot. And it's those adjustments where the real magic happens when it comes to fitting. And I guess, a bit of a news flash, you can't teach unless you know a lot about equipment. And you can't do equipment unless you know a lot about the golf swing in dynamic terms. So not just the geometry of the swing, but in actual dynamic terms. So how do people use the club to generate power? That's really the key. And by understanding club interaction, I'm just going to use lie angle as an example here. So I'm always amazed, my big thing is, one of my big things is that I believe that golf clubs have become, more people are playing clubs that are too upright than clubs that are too flat. Generally speaking, the adjustment that somebody makes to a club that's too flat is much better for their golf game than the adjustment they make for a club which is too upright. PGA Pro, I did my training many years ago. You go and do your training, and the man from the PGA stands there and he says, well, if somebody has a club that's too upright, everything goes left. And if somebody has a club that's too flat, everything goes right. And that's a really good example of the major problem with the way that these people view equipment, because it doesn't take into account the fact, the absolute fact, that that person will adjust to the club that's in their hand. So what's really important if you're having a set of irons fitted is what I call the dynamic specification. The lie angle, the shaft, the weight, the length. And if you get those things right, that is a club that you will hit more good shots with. It's not just, not all the bad shots are your fault. Obviously the majority of them are. But sometimes if there's a club in your hand which is asking you to make a terrible adjustment, which is, the adjustment you make for a club which is too upright is a terrible adjustment, and I'll explain why in a second. So if you're having to make a bad adjustment for the club that's in your hand, if you've got a club in your hand which is somehow trying to cancel out your flaws, so for example the equipment companies will turn around because it's this one-dimensional thinking where they'll go, oh okay, well most golfers lose balls to the right, therefore we're going to give them an upright club. That is a disaster. It does not work. So the moment you give somebody a club which counteracts their issues, you make the issue worse every time, because that person will bat up against that specification of the club. You'll see why in a second. Let's go and have a look on the launch monitor. So So as you can see, the reason I use this brilliant launch monitor is because to the trained eye, this image is worth much more than all the assumed measurements. And the reason I say assumed is because they're not real measurements from Foresight or TrackMan or any of the radar systems. I would much rather have this image for me, because I can see exactly what's going on. I can see it with my own eyes. I'm not having to, you know, with different head types, when for example, some launch monitors are taking a reference point from different bits of the head, it all gets a bit mixed up. You know, TrackMan guys can't talk to Foresight guys because they're working off different measurements. I don't know why nobody smells a rat there. Anyway, so let's have a look. So using this image, you're going to be able to see exactly what the adjustment that somebody would make for a club which is too upright. So I personally play my clubs really flat. So this is my 6-iron, and my 6-iron is 57.5 degrees. So 57. Most of the companies today, our standard lie angle on a 6-iron is as much as 62 degrees. So they would consider my 6-iron 5.5 degrees flat. My standard is 60 degrees. So what I consider standard lie angle is 60 degrees. So for me, mine is 2.5 flat. So I'm going to hit a couple of shots and we'll look at the image and then I'll talk about what the adjustment is. So you'll notice when I hit this one, oh! If you get a look at the screen there, you'll see what a terribly towed shot looks like. So you can see there, I've hit it miles out of the toe, so that's deflected the club open. That's why the club looks so open. So, unlike loads of other people, Tour Experience Golf, we leave the bad shots in. And we don't choose the launch monitor either. Keep it how it is. Keep it what it should be. Okay, so there's a good one. Right, so things to notice: sole of club nicely flat on the ground. That's absolutely pounded. Look how straight it is, Charlie. There's just barely any deviation at all. So club nice and flat on the ground. Club looks open, so a lot of people go, oh, it's an open club face. Bear in mind, what's important is the direction the centre of gravity is travelling in. So I'm very inside, so I can actually hit draws with an open club face. God, if you said that to somebody at the PJ when I did my training, they would have absolutely, steam would have come out of their ears. Right, so I've just adjusted this club to what I consider as being very upright. It's probably standard in most of the equipment companies' eyes, so it's 62 degrees. Now, if I put the exact same swing on it, which is highly unlikely I will do, this is 5.5 degrees different lie angle to what my club is. But what I want you to, sorry Charlie, I meant to show you this before. But what I want you to take into account here is the contact point is on my left heel and the shaft on my club is leaning forward, okay? And that's what we're going to refer back to, because you're going to see the adjustment on this one. So I'm going to allow myself to adjust to this club. Okay, so I've hit it pretty good. But the way I've managed to hit it pretty good is that the contact point had to be further back in my stance. And you notice how the shaft, it is just about leaning forward at the contact point, but it's pretty vertical by the second point. So by the time it gets to the impact point that it was with my club, the shaft's pretty vertical. So here's the point. The adjustment that people make to make an upright club work, right? If the sole of the club is not flush on the ground at impact, it's a shit shot, right? It's never going to be a good shot. It's always going to be like a weird little duffy one to the left. It's not just going to be, oh, your club's too upright, so the ball's going a bit left, or the club's too flat, so the ball's going a bit right. It's going to be a terrible strike, and so you are going to adjust very quickly to that. And believe me when I say this, when I get people in here and I change the lie angle of their clubs, all standards of player adjust to it pretty much like within about 3 shots. It's amazing. And when you see that, you start to realise how, when you're fitting, you've got to be able to fit somebody. You've got to have enough knowledge to know when a club is going to encourage somebody to do the things that they need to do to play their best golf. So the adjustment that I make for an upright club is put it back in my stance, release the club early, right? So I've had people here who have been they're obsessed with forward lean. I've got to compress my irons, I've got to compress my irons. And they're going to some pro who's telling them to get onto their left side and try and lean the shaft forward at impact with an upright club. So what happens, right? They go forwards, they then have to back out of it, they hit it worse than they ever have done, and the pro just tells them, oh, you've got to keep working on it, you know, you just got to keep going. We watched, when my eyes were really open to this, I was with my friend Lee at Wentworth, we were working on the range at Wentworth, and Rafa Cabrera Bello was working with, well, I won't say who one of them was a top biomechanics guy, and the other one was David Ledbetter, who I don't really have a problem saying is a complete charlatan, but they're working with him, two supposedly very knowledgeable guys, right? And he's on a balance plate, and they want to get his maximum force point exactly on his impact point, and every time it's dropping off because he's basically having to just back out just before impact. And neither of these so-called experts realised that he was playing a club that was 4 degrees upright with a really stiff shaft. He had no chance. If he'd have done what they were telling him to do, he would have shanked it through the front door of the players' lounge. Fact. And that was, well, that was the moment. That was about probably 15, 16 years ago now. But that was the moment where I really had that realisation. And I could say that Lee nudged me in that direction a bit, but it's amazing. And if you look at your equipment this way, getting equipment that enables you to do what you need to do, you're much better off, and it will really cause you to question 95% of the things that go on in golf today, especially demo days.